On October 16, 2025, the rock world lost a star that refused to fade, Ace Frehley, the man with the silver face and the soul that burned beneath the metallic paint of Kiss. He passed away at 74 after a fall in his New Jersey recording studio, the place where he was still doing the only thing he ever truly knew: playing music. The news was confirmed by his family just hours after fans noticed an unusual silence on his social media. To the world, Ace Frehley was the Spaceman, the man who launched Kiss into orbit with riffs like rocket fire and performances that made his guitar seem to glow in the dark. But behind that silver mask was a man who once lost himself to alcohol, loneliness, and the echo of his own legend. He left Kiss, then returned, spent years in the shadows, yet never lost the spark of creation. Now, as his Gibson Les Paul falls silent forever, people finally realize that sound was never just the background to a legend, it was the heartbeat of an entire generation. He left this world doing what he loved most. Just weeks before his death, Ace Frehley was still in a burst of creative energy. He spent most of his time in his Morristown, New Jersey studio, recording new tracks for his next solo project, an album he described as a return to the energy of my youth. Those close to him recalled that during those days, Frehley was full of life. He drove himself to the studio every morning, played guitar for hours, and still wore the same old silver jacket he'd kept since the Love Gun era. But on the afternoon of September 18th, tragedy struck. While stepping out of the control room to grab another guitar, Frehley slipped on the freshly polished wooden floor, falling hard and striking his head on the edge of the mixing desk. At first, everyone thought it was just a minor fall. He was still conscious and even joked, "Not even the universe can knock me down." But a few hours later, Frehley began to lose his balance. His speech slowed, and he was rushed to Morristown Memorial Hospital. Doctors diagnosed him with a traumatic brain injury accompanied by internal bleeding and performed emergency surgery that night. After the operation, Frehley slipped into a coma and was placed in intensive care. In the days that followed, his condition failed to improve. His family, including his longtime girlfriend and daughter Monique, stayed by his bedside while fans around the world lit candles and prayed under the hashtag #FatcherPrayForAce. By early October, word leaked that he had become dependent on life support. Doctors told the family that the brain was no longer responding significantly. They were advised to prepare for the worst. And on the morning of October 16, 2025, in a quiet hospital room filled with old photos, silent guitars, and New York groove playing softly on the speakers, Ace Frehley took his final breath. No noise, no stage, only the sound of a legend quietly leaving the universe he once helped create. But to understand why his death left the rock world in stunned silence, we have to go back to the gray streets of the Bronx, where a poor boy first discovered that the sound of a guitar could save a lost soul. No one could have guessed that the kid once expelled for fighting would one day make millions look up, as if he truly came from another planet. Ace Frehley, born Paul Daniel Frehley on April 27, 1951, in the Bronx, New York City, came into the world in a place known more for its rough neighborhoods, gang rivalries, and kids raised on fists than for fairy tales. His family was of Dutch and German descent, devoutly Christian. His father, a calm and serious man, worked as an electrical engineer. His mother was a homemaker, devoted to the family. Music ran through the household. His parents played classical piano, his brother studied classical guitar, and his sister played clarinet in the school band. But Ace, the youngest, was the exception. For him, Music wasn't something to be played in a quiet living room. It had to roar on the streets in the chaos, amid the flames and noise. From a young age, Ace was different. He wasn't a good student, wasn't obedient, and had no interest in following the rules. By middle school, he had already begun skipping school and causing trouble. In his teens, he joined the Ducky Boys, a gang rooted in the Bronx Irish-American community, where bullets, blades, and blood were the glue that held its members together. Ace wasn't just an outsider, he was a rebel. He fought, he dropped out, he got caught up in petty theft, and was once written up by the police for public disturbances. In one street fight, someone smashed a beer bottle over his head, a blow that left him needing stitches and staring silently into a mirror for hours afterward. He never said it aloud, but that moment seemed to awaken something in him, a realization that if he kept going down that path, his destination wouldn't be a stage, but a prison cell. Just when everything was unraveling, music entered his life like a miracle. At age 13, for Christmas, his parents gave him his first electric guitar. No teacher, no book, just his ears, his heart, and a hunger for something loud and new. He plugged the guitar into an amp and started figuring things out by feel, learning riffs from Hendrix, Cream, the Yardbirds, Led Zeppelin. His fingers were rough, but each time he pressed a string, it was like channeling the Bronx's fury into electricity and blasting it back through the amp. While his friends fell into drugs or got arrested, Ace locked himself in with his guitar. When his parents panicked over his blank report cards and calls from school, he would simply say, "I'm gonna do something with music." No one believed him. But he believed. He played at parties, small gigs, friends' homes, garages, anywhere there was a power outlet. No mentor, no map. But nothing could stop him. Still, rebellion clung to him. He was expelled from 2 high schools for fighting and chronic truancy. At the third, DeWitt Clinton High School. He dropped out without telling anyone. At the time, no one thought he'd amount to much. A street kid, no diploma, no plan, but with a fire inside that no one had ever seen before. Ace would later say, "I wasn't born to be taught. I was born to hear the guitar and make it explode." His early life was chaotic, poor, violent, and lonely. But it forged a symbol. Not a rebel shaped by the stage, but one hammered into form by life itself. The Bronx could swallow an entire generation whole. But Ace Frehley, somehow, made it out. Not by dreaming, but by plugging in. In the early 1970s, while New York's rock scene was erupting with names like the New York Dolls, Blue Oyster Cult, and Twisted Sister, Ace Frehley was still a nobody, drifting between local bands, clutching a cheap guitar, and playing anywhere there was a mic. He joined and left a string of obscure groups like the Exterminators, Malamo, Four Roses, but none of them held him for long, because Ace wasn't looking for a band. He was chasing something bigger, wilder, and more dangerous. In 1972, fate took a turn. A strange ad appeared in the Village Voice. Rock band seeking a lead guitarist. Influences: Led Zeppelin, Alice Cooper, Slade. It was placed by Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley, who were building a new band with drummer Peter Criss. Ace showed up late to the audition wearing mismatched socks and Adidas sneakers, like he'd just landed from another planet. But when he plugged in and played, the room practically tore open. Stanley later recalled, "We'd never heard anyone play like that. It was the scream of metal, electricity, and a swagger we didn't yet have." Ace was hired on the spot, and soon after, the name Kiss was born. From an anonymous guitarist, Ace Frehley became a core element of a band that would soon redefine American rock. He was the one who designed Kiss's iconic logo with the lightning bolt SS, the Spaceman persona, the cold-eyed alien with dreamy eyes, long hair, and a smoke-spewing guitar, was entirely his own creation. On stage, Ace seemed possessed. He barely moved, rarely spoke, never made eye contact with the crowd, but when it came time to solo, everything exploded. In songs like Cold Gin, Parasite, Shock Me, and Rocket Ride, Ace's guitar wasn't just an instrument, it was the untamed soul of Kiss. He didn't need perfect technique or deep philosophy, just a riff weird enough, a bend sharp enough, and an attitude that couldn't be faked. In 1978, when all 4 Kiss members released solo albums, it was Ace Frehley's record that stood out, both in sales and critical reception. His cover of New York Groove became a surprise hit, placing Ace on equal footing with more favored frontmen like Stanley and Simmons. It was the first and rare moment where Ace Frehley stepped out of Kiss's shadow and proved he could shine on his own. But success was never smooth. From the start, Ace's relationship with the other members was riddled with tension. Paul Stanley, the perfectionist, couldn't stand Ace's unpredictable work ethic. Gene Simmons, the master strategist, looked down on his indifference and lack of commitment. Yet even they couldn't deny one thing. Without Ace, Kiss would never have had that guitar tone that sounded like it came from another planet. Ace Frehley's musical career began with street fights and stitches on his scalp. And just a few years later, he was playing sold-out stadiums, with the same distant gaze, the same defiance, and the same refusal to belong to anyone. By the mid-1970s, Kiss was no longer just a band. They were a phenomenon, a stage empire, a storm of imagery, an escape for a generation of American youth disillusioned with reality. Amidst the lights, flames, fake blood, Gene Simmons' demon wings, and Paul Stanley's seductive theatrics, it was Ace Frehley's guitar that grounded the band's soul in what it was meant to be: raw, dirty, unvarnished rock. From the Alive album, 1975, the live record that saved the band from bankruptcy, to Destroyer, Rock and Roll Over, and Love Gun, Ace's guitar was the sonic spearhead that shaped Kiss's entire identity. He didn't write many lyrics, didn't charm the media, didn't sell the brand, but every time he stepped into the studio and plugged in, Kiss's music gained real weight. The track Shock Me, 1977, from Love Gun marked a pivotal moment. It was Ace Frehley's debut as lead vocalist and his declaration of existence within the group. The song was inspired by a real incident in which Ace was severely electrocuted during a concert but returned to the stage just minutes later. That was who he was. No theatrics, no drama, just quietly walking back out and playing. In Shock Me, his solo seemed to turn that electric shock into raw energy, a defiant statement that fans had never heard from anyone else in the band. And Ace didn't just play the guitar, he weaponized it. At live shows, his Les Paul was rigged with smoke machines, LED lights, and even flamethrowers. Kids were terrified, parents outraged, teens obsessed. Ace wasn't the spokesperson of the band. He was the part no one could explain. In 1978, when Kiss decided each member would release a solo album, critics predicted Ace would flop. He sang little, spoke even less, and rarely appeared on television. But the Ace Frehley album turned out to be the most loved, with his cover of New York Groove breaking into the Billboard charts, a silent slap to the egos of his more vocal bandmates. People began to realize it was precisely because he didn't compromise, didn't try to be loved, that his music felt so real. From 1976 to 1979, Kiss stopped being just a rock band. They became a full-blown pop culture empire. The Destroyer and Alive 2 tours sold out worldwide, elevating them from local theaters in New Jersey to global arenas like Madison Square Garden and Tokyo's Budokan. Children, dressed up as KISS members. Adults lined up for tickets, and all of America, from Wall Street to trailer parks, knew the faces painted in white, eyes blacked out, and lips curled like comic book Grim Reapers. Their fame extended beyond records, into toys, pinball machines, Marvel comics, school lunchboxes, Halloween masks, and even bras printed with the Spaceman face. That mania, a point of pride for Gene Simmons and a tool for expansion for Paul Stanley, made Ace Frehley feel lost. He had never entered music to become merchandise. While the band negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts with Casablanca Records and appeared on countless talk shows, Ace just wanted to play. He felt like he was being turned into a cartoon character, a commercial symbol, when the only thing he truly knew how to do was make a guitar shriek, buzz, and howl. Backstage, he often sat alone with a bottle, sunglasses on, avoiding the cameras. Not because he was shy, but because he hated the fakeness creeping in. Things slid further during the making of Dynasty, 1979, a deliberate pivot toward disco rock meant to keep younger fans engaged. Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons saw it as a strategic move, but to Ace, it was a betrayal of the band's raw roots, the wild spirit that had once made KISS dangerous. He showed up late to the studio, often drunk and sometimes not at all. When he did play, his solos were distant, icy, and unapologetically indifferent. Around the same time, Ace was the only member who opposed the release of music from The Elder, an overambitious concept album that strayed far from the fan base and ultimately bombed. But his voice no longer carried weight. KISS was no longer four guys playing together. It had become a corporation with executives, shares, and marketing campaigns. Yet one truth remained. If Gene Simmons was the businessman and Paul Stanley the spotlight manipulator, then Ace Frehley was KISS's free soul. He didn't come to build an empire. He came to burn it down with a solo. And yet, right at their peak, Ace Frehley began to fade away. No announcement, no tears, no drama. He simply vanished. Skipped studio sessions, missed meetings, lost interest in video shoots. There was no explosion, no dramatic farewell. The unraveling of Ace Frehley and KISS came like a slow bleed, beginning in the studio, seeping into backstage tensions, and eventually corroding whatever bonds remained between him and the band he had helped build from the ground up. By the late 1970s, as KISS shifted toward commercial reinvention with albums like Dynasty and Unmasked, Ace was like a lost guest at a party he no longer wanted to attend. While Gene Simmons envisioned a Hollywood-fueled KISS, and Paul Stanley obsessed over image control, Ace clung to the one thing he still cared about, the guitar, and the very thing destroying it, alcohol. Drunkenness became a constant. He showed up to recording sessions groggy, or didn't show up at all. When he was present, his solos were delivered with cold, detached defiance, as if saying, "This is my part. If you don't like it, don't use it." Every meeting spiraled into arguments. Every tour was a battle. Ace versus himself. Ace versus management. Ace versus the band. His relationship with Paul Stanley grew particularly tense. Paul was a perfectionist, committed to schedules, rehearsals, and professional presentation. All things Ace found mind-numbing. To Paul, Ace was a reckless liability. To Ace, Paul was a controlling manipulator. There was no longer mutual respect, only mutual contempt. Ironically, that very tension had once birthed some of KISS's most explosive musical moments. With Gene Simmons, the conflict ran even deeper, philosophical in nature. Simmons saw KISS as a corporation, a brand that could extend into everything from face wash to band-branded coffins. But Ace never wanted to be a CEO or a trademark. He just wanted to be a free guitarist. Simmons loved discipline, profit, and planning. Ace tossed all that into his guitar and walked away without looking back. They were two worlds that could never align. Even his alliance with Peter Criss, his fellow rebel from the early days, began to fracture. Once bonded by their shared outsider status within the Paul-Gene power duo, the two spiraled into booze, drugs, and violent mood swings. Their friendship became a ticking time bomb. They fought, yelled, and sabotaged each other backstage. At one show, Peter smashed his drum kit mid-performance, and Ace laughed. A careless grin, but a fractured one. Off stage, Ace's life slipped further into chaos. He was caught drunk driving multiple times. Relationships fell apart. He withdrew from public life, appearing only when absolutely required. To the fans, he was still the cool, enigmatic Spaceman. But inside the band, Ace had become a ticking landmine, and inside himself, he was a storm of depression no one truly understood. By 1982, Ace Frehley officially left Kiss. But it wasn't the start of a new chapter. It was a slide off the edge, with no applause, no spotlight. In the years that followed, he lost his direction. He launched Frehley's Comet and released several albums, but the looming shadow of his past made every effort feel like a comparison, and often a disappointment. Meanwhile, Ace kept repeating the cycle. Drink, disappear, play, fade again. Looking back, Ace Frehley's downfall wasn't caused by any one enemy. It was the collision between genius and machinery. A man unwilling to bend, placed inside a system that demanded compromise. And when he couldn't, or wouldn't, adapt, that machine quietly crushed him under the very gears he had once helped set in motion. Leaving Kiss in 1982, Ace Frehley felt like he had unshackled himself, but he also lost the glass cage of fame that once shielded him from the darker sides of real life. Gone were the massive stage lights, the fake blood, and fireworks. What remained was a solitary man with a worn-out Les Paul, a few empty beer cans, and a flickering belief that he could still make music his own way. He formed the band Frehley's Comet, recruited young musicians, and began a new chapter playing in small venues, local halls, and dive bars. The self-titled debut album, released in 1987, received fairly positive reception, especially with the song Rock Soldiers, where Ace, for the first time, openly recounted his near-fatal drunk driving accident. With a raspy voice, aggressive guitar, and a staggering but emotional rhythm, Ace had found his own voice. No makeup, no Kiss branding. But in a cruel twist of fate, everything he built began to collapse, not because of bad music, but because of the man himself. Tours were canceled last minute because he simply didn't show up. Interviews postponed due to drunkenness, insomnia, depression. Bandmates left, unable to endure his apathy, confusion, and disorganized chaos. Though there were moments of brilliance, Frehley's Comet quickly fell apart, leaving Ace once again with no one but himself. Throughout the 1990s, Ace nearly vanished from the music scene. He lived in seclusion, drowned in debt, battling addiction and the emptiness left in Kiss's wake. Then, in 1996, an unexpected light broke through. Kiss reunited the original lineup for the massive Alive Worldwide tour. Ace returned, still in his Spaceman makeup, but now carrying the weight of the past and a foggy future. The tour was wildly successful, putting him back under the spotlight, but it couldn't mend the fractures that had taken root deep within. In 2002, he left the band again, this time for good. Only after that final departure did Ace Frehley fully step into his true solo chapter. No longer chasing fame or redemption, he simply played. Anomaly, 2009, marked a surprising and serious comeback, earning praise both commercially and critically. Critics celebrated its rawness, its dirty authenticity, and its refusal to conform. He followed up with Space Invader 2014, Origins Volume 1 2016, Spaceman 2018, and Origins Volume 2 2020, a series of albums stamped with his personality, sometimes rough, sometimes offbeat, but always real. In 2024, he released 10,000 Volts, hailed by critics as a final electric surge from planet Ace. Tracks like Up in the Sky and Cosmic Heart proved that even in his 70s, he could still deliver riffs that made younger generations nod in respect. The album radiated a dark but kinetic energy, much like the man himself, weathered but unbroken, battered yet still playing as if it's the only thing left worth believing in. Ace Frehley never became a commercial solo superstar. He never sought to. But his solitude, defiance, and the raw, unpolished honesty in every project forged a distinct Ace school of rock, where artists aren't boxed in, where music doesn't need to be professionally produced, but only needs to be played when the player is still alive. His solo career was anything but smooth or linear, but it's that very distortion that gave it soul. As he once said in an unscripted interview, "I didn't come here to make music beautiful. I came to let it know I still exist." Behind the smoke-spewing guitar and the distant smile on stage, Ace Frehley's personal life is a hazy gray zone, a place where light rarely reaches and wounds never fully heal. He could scream through a solo, set an arena ablaze with one searing bend. But in private rooms, Ace Frehley was a man suspended between isolation and chaos. He married Jeanette Treratola, and together they had a daughter, Monique. But like the man himself, the marriage lacked stability, lacked foundation, and quickly fractured. During the years Ace wrestled with alcohol addiction, was constantly away on tour, and struggled to control his behavior. His daughter grew up with little presence of a father. In the rare moments he mentioned his family, Ace would usually deflect, as if it were a chapter he didn't have the courage to reread. Behind the Spaceman persona was an absentee father, and he knew it. His personal life wasn't lacking in women, but it lacked lasting love. One of his most prominent relationships was with Rachel Gordon, a long-term girlfriend and companion. But in 2020, everything collapsed when Rachel filed for a restraining order, accusing Ace of violence and threats. The incident prompted the media to resurface his long history of arrests for public intoxication, reckless driving, and disorderly conduct. Ace's response: he said little, only stating that he went to the house to retrieve his belongings and did not act aggressively. Like many times before, he chose silence, retreating inward, avoiding confrontation instead of facing it. His finances followed a similar pattern of decline. In 2013, Ace lost his home in Yorktown Heights, New York, due to a defaulted mortgage loan exceeding $700,000. Around the same period, he was accused of owing nearly $20,000 in back taxes over 2 consecutive years. By 2024, he openly admitted he couldn't renew his passport because he owed the IRS more than $200,000. A man who once stood before tens of thousands of fans could now no longer leave the country, not due to politics, but debt. Perhaps the darkest part was the inner emptiness Ace never quite found a name for. He once said, "There are nights I finish playing, go back to the hotel room, look at my guitar, and I'm not sure I want to keep living." It wasn't melodramatic pessimism. It was the voice of someone who had lived the brightest lights and realized they were never enough to warm the coldest corners of his soul. His friends, colleagues, and fans, many cared for him, but just as many couldn't handle his unpredictability. He could be kind, funny, warm, and then disappear without a word. Closeness with Ace always came with a condition. No one could get too close. In a world where artists often turn their private lives into part of their brand, Ace Frehley did the opposite. He hid, he brushed it aside, he refused to narrate. But that very silence made people want to look closer at the darkness he tried to conceal, where there was a tormented artist, a regretful father, a man both running from and yearning to be saved. And yet, amid all the wreckage, Ace Frehley never stopped trying to rise again. He may have failed in marriage, lost himself in alcohol and debt, but he never stopped fighting his own demons. Each comeback, even in smaller halls with dimmer lights, saw him bring along that same old guitar, as if to prove that the artist within him had never died. In 2025, just before fate closed the final chapter of his life, Ace Frehley lived as though time itself had no claim over him. At 74, the Spaceman still carried his silver Les Paul across small stages and studios throughout America. No more pyrotechnics, no more explosions like in Kiss's heyday, yet still the same soul that once made millions of fans look up to the sky. In the early months of the year, Frehley performed at the Mohegan Sun Arena and the Jam at the Dam Festival in Connecticut. Fans said he still had it. His voice was rough but witty, and his hands still glided over the strings as if age and passion had never parted ways. Backstage, he spoke excitedly about his next project, Origins Volume 3, the continuation of his tribute series to the artists who shaped him. "I'm not playing to relive the past," he said in a brief interview. "I'm playing to thank it." In early September, he suffered a minor accident in the studio that forced him to cancel several shows. Yet just weeks later, Ace insisted on returning to the stage, moving slower now, breathing heavier, but still pushing through. On October 6, 2025, he posted a message on Instagram that made fans' hearts sink. "Due to ongoing health issues, I have to cancel the rest of my tour. But don't worry, I'm still here, in the studio, where the music never stops." No one knew it would be his last message. Just 10 days later, the accident that would take his life occurred, ending the journey of a man who had spent decades soaring through imagined skies on stage and crashing again and again in real life. Yet even in his final year, Ace Frehley kept doing the only thing he knew, playing music as if it were his final breath. Ace Frehley's death wasn't just the passing of a man, it was the extinguishing of a star that once lit up the entire rock and roll sky. He didn't just play guitar, he turned it into a spacecraft that carried listeners beyond Earth itself. From Shock Me to Rocket Ride, every solo he played felt like a challenge to gravity itself, raw, radiant, and unmistakably his own. When news of his passing broke, Gene Simmons wrote, "Without Ace, Kiss would never have taken flight. Paul Stanley's tribute was simpler. He was the spirit of rebellion we all once chased." Around the world, from New York to Tokyo, fans lit candles beside old posters, scrawling the familiar words, "Once a spaceman, always a spaceman." People mourned the silence left behind, but they also understood that Ace Frehley was never meant for the ground. He was born to burn bright, to make the guitar speak for dreamers, and to remind us that sometimes the loneliest souls create the most extraordinary miracles. And now, in the quiet of space, if you listen closely, you can still hear his guitar, drifting through the silver clouds, like a star that never went out. Ace Frehley was never the fastest, most precise, or most disciplined guitarist. He didn't compose complex symphonies, nor did he chase the image of a great artist in the classical sense. But in the world of rock, where what matters most is how you make people feel when you play, Ace Frehley stands as an irreplaceable icon. He didn't play like a musician. He played like an instinct. Every solo by Ace, whether simple or chaotic, carried a single, unmistakable sensation: the scream of a man who refuses to be tamed. From Cold Gin, Shock Me, Rocket Ride, to Strange Ways, his guitar wasn't just sound, it was attitude. A lazy smirk in a perfectionist world, a defiant swing from someone who didn't care about standards. Because of that, he inspired an entire generation of guitarists. Dimebag Darrell, Pantera, once said Ace was the reason I wanted to be on stage. Slash, Guns N' Roses, admitted he picked up the guitar because of Ace. And that, Alive, was the album that changed his childhood. Dave Grohl, Scott Ian, Tom Morello, Mike McCready, the list of musicians who cite Frehley as their idol stretches across genres. Not because he was a technical master, but because he was living proof that wildness needed no explanation. Visually, the Spaceman character he created became a permanent fixture in pop culture. Halloween costumes, action figures, character masks, Marvel comic book covers, all bore Ace's dreamy eyes and glowing guitar. Even when Kiss replaced him with other members, fans held firm. There's only one true Spaceman, and that's Ace Frehley. In 2014, Ace was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame alongside the founding members of Kiss. But even at that celebration, he remained true to form. No assimilation, no apologies, no pretenses. He didn't seek approval from the establishment because he knew his impact couldn't be measured by charts or awards. On October 16, 2025, the Silver Star finally drifted out of its orbit. The fatal fall in the studio closed more than half a century of wandering between music and solitude, but also opened another immortal chapter where Ace Frehley ceased to be a man and became pure sound. The music he left behind has become a universal language for dreamers, for those who once believed that with just a guitar and a little recklessness, they too could touch the sky. Ace Frehley's legacy isn't measured in platinum records or sterile statistics. It lives in every kid who struggles to play the Shock Me solo. It lives in every self-taught musician who dares to believe in their own chaotic noise. And it lives in every riff that bursts out like an engine on the verge of exploding, the kind of sound that only Ace could make. Right. Ace never tried to become a legend, but by refusing every mold, he accidentally became one. When Frehley slowly stepped away from the big stages, he didn't carry fireworks or dazzling lights. He carried a legacy forged from raw electric guitar, unyielding spirit, and the heart of an artist who never surrendered. Even after years of silence, personal missteps, and seemingly unhealable rifts, he remained proof that rock and roll never dies. It merely changes form inside those who dare to live honestly. Ace Frehley will forever be the Spaceman, not just in the mythology of Kiss, but in the memories of every soul that ever trembled before one of his solos. A man who lived as if every show were his last, played as if no one were watching, and left this world like a falling star, leaving behind a trail of light that will never fade. What do you think about Ace Frehley's turbulent yet unbreakable journey? Which of his solos still echoes in your mind? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe to join us as we continue exploring the legends of rock and roll. Thank you for watching, and as Ace once said, the sky isn't the limit, it's just the beginning.